Right now, I'm challenging myself to see if I can make 128 Regulation H teams that are each different from one another over the course of 128 days. Why 128, you might ask? At the end of the 128 days, we're going to do something special where we battle every team against each other in a single elimination bracket to see which team emerges on top. There will be some competitively strong teams, there will be some gimmick teams, and there will be some probably a good number of goofs and gaffs in there, so if you want to follow through to the end, subscribe so that you can keep up with each day. But without further ado, let's move on to day 104. Alright everybody, welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be going over a Gen 4 team. Now Gen 4 is probably the first generation that I feel like hasn't been power crept too badly, mostly because Gen 4 was the generation that basically power crept all the generations that came before it. Because we got a lot of new evolutions for Pokemon from previous generations that were not fully evolved, and a lot of those Pokemon still hold up today, some of them more or less than others. But starting off here, we have, of course, the world champion Pokemon Pachirisu, and Pachirisu is a good Pokemon because it has Follow Me in its moveset, which was one of the most vital things that everybody memes about from the Pokemon World Championships, is that Pachirisu could redirect damage into itself. And while we don't have any Pokemon that necessarily benefit from it, we do have the Volt Absorb on Pachirisu, which means that Pachirisu will redirect all electric type moves into itself and take no damage, and also get a little bit of health back whenever it takes an electric type move. As well as Pachirisu also has the Nuzzle, which is a move that you can use to damage your opponent just the tiniest little bit, but the big thing that you want from Nuzzle is its 100% chance to paralyze your opponent, meaning that Pachirisu gives you a little bit of speed control that way, but also adds a little bit of variance into the game in your favor, as well as we have the Super Fang on Pachirisu just so that we can get rid of half of the opponent's health whenever they're at full health, and then after that it gets weaker, but still really good to be able to take half health off your opponent because it helps you sustain momentum. And we are Covert Cloak on Pachirisu so that Pachirisu is not feeling the effects of Fake Out mostly, but also all secondary effects of moves, and we're Grass type mostly so that we are ignoring powder moves. But also Grass allows us to resist ground, which was our only previous weakness. Up next, I decided to include Miss Magius, and whenever I looked at Miss Magius, I realized Miss Magius is actually way faster than I remember it being, because 105 speed is definitely nothing to scoff at, especially in this format, where it feels like the 100 or 102 base speed is really the speed to beat. Miss Magius can outspeed a lot of things, which is pretty neat. And for this Miss Maggies, we are going for a choice spec set so that we can hopefully get off some pretty good either chip or KOing damage, as we have a lot of type coverage moves in the Hex, since we do have some status spreading on this team, and the Pachirisu's Nuzzle and the Gallade has Will-O-Wisp. We can afford to hex the opponent, but we also have the Dazzling Gleam for a bit of spread damage, mostly into dragons it would be really helpful for. Then we also have the Energy Ball to hit things like water types or ground types, and lastly we have Mystical Fire, which co-aligns with our Terra Fire on the Miss Magius and also allows us to drop the special attack of our opponents by one stage. Up next, we've got Garchomp, and of course the Gen 4 team has Garchomp because Garchomp is just such a strong ground type attack Pokemon. And our Garchomp is going to be using the Life Orb in order to boost our damage for all of our stem moves, which is the Earthquake, which a lot of this team can afford to either protect or dodge the Earthquake, as well as we just have the Stomping Tantrum for that little bit of single target damage. But also if we get faked out on Garchomp, then it becomes a doubled to a 150 base power move. And we also have the Dragon Claw on Garchomp in order to just have some consistent stab damage as well, and we're Terra Ground just to further boost the power of our two big ground type hitting options, and we're Rough Skin because we're not running Sand on this team. Next up, we're going to be slotting in Staraptor, and we're going to be using this Staraptor kind of as an Intimidate pivot Pokemon, where we can use it to lower the opponent's attack, and then maybe change out using the U-turn. We also have some flying type damage in the Brave Bird, and we have the Tailwind to try and give ourselves some speed control. Not the greatest Tailwind setter, but also not the worst, as we have the Choice Scarf just to make sure that we're outspeeding a lot of Pokemon that we need to outspeed. There's not too much that can touch Staraptor Staraptor, except for like Swift that Staraptor doesn't do too well. And lastly, we have a good amount of HP investment on Staraptor so that we can use Final Gambit with it. And while we don't have a ton of HP on Staraptor, it is nice to use Final Gambit just to get rid of some of the lower health mon. Up next, we're including Mamoswine here because I wanted to use Mamoswine's offensive power and the fact that we can use the loaded dice on Mamoswine in combination with Icicle Spear to make it so that we have a really strong ice type attack on Mamoswine that allows us to ignore Focus Sash Pokemon, as well as the Ice Shard also allows us to get a little bit of priority ice type chip on the opponent, and High Horsepower is some good solid ground type single target stab. And we have Oblivious on Mamoswine, which means that we will not be getting taunted, so our Protect will always stay intact. But the big thing is obviously that we are immune to Intimidate on Mamoswine, so we don't have to worry about Incineroar lowering our attack, and then we can hopefully KO it with High Horsepower. And then we're Terra Water on Mamoswine, mostly because I want to be resisting other waters and fire types on Mamoswine. And lastly, on this team, we have Gallade, who can fulfill a role of being a Wide Guard Mon for all of our other Pokemon that don't want to be taking any spread damage, but we also have the Will-O-Wisp for that aforementioned statusing, along with Miss Magius's Hex, so we can click Will-O-Wisp into Pokemon in order to lower their physical damage that they deal into us, and we can knock off the opponent's items, and if they have defense boost for whatever reason, we can Sacred Sword through their defense boost. And Sacred Sword is going to be the only move that we have on this set that is being boosted by the sharpness, but Sacred Sword is still really strong and the other abilities aren't as worth running, so we're going to be using sharpness. And we're going to have a Focus Sash so that we can always afford to take at least one hit, and we're Grass type mostly just so that we can avoid powder moves. But yeah, that's the basic gist of the team. Let's get into some battles. So first up, we have a battle against a pretty fierce Rain team here, as they have the Pelipper, Archaludon, and Bascu Legion Rain mode, and then Goldengo is thrown in there for good measure, but also their use of Hydreigon makes it kind of difficult for us to bring Guard Shot, because we cannot afford to Earthquake into them so easily whenever they have a Flying type and a Levitate mon. But we lead Mamoswine and Pachirisu here, and they lead Pelipper and Bascu Legion, because I kind of figured that that would be their best opening into most of our Pokemon, because Bascu Legion is being pretty unchecked in its speed control, and we don't have any water resistances on this team unless we go for a Terra. So we immediately protect Mamoswine so that it doesn't get hit, and we draw the Wave Crash from Bascu Legion, and we get a little bit of nuzzle, actually a lot of bit of nuzzle damage there on the crit into Pelipper, which paralyzes it, but Pelipper returns a Weather Ball into Pachirisu. But now we swap into Staraptor to intimidate down Bascu Legion, and we Terra Water on Mamoswine in order to resist the Wave Crash instead of being weak to it. And Bascu Legion takes recoil damage, and it takes Life Orb damage as Mamoswine throws back a High Horsepower, and Pelipper did not get to move there because it was paralyzed. But if I had to guess, if it went for Weather Ball into either target there, it wasn't too much of a big deal. We swap into Pachirisu here just because I wanted to save Staraptor, but also Pachirisu going down at this point to like Bascu Legion Wave Crash if they tried to target Staraptor in order to take it out would not be too much of a big deal, and it also means that Pachirisu would take Bascu Legion with it. But we also tried to Ice Shard off Bascu Legion, but the opponent just double protects here. Not quite sure what the thought process was there. I think maybe they did expect the Ice Shard into Bascu Legion and then just wanted to see what the Staraptor was going to do. But because we swapped in Pachirisu, we can Follow Me Away, the Aqua Jet, which is still going to take out Pachirisu, but Bascu Legion is going to take itself because of its Life Orb, and we get the Icicle Spear into Pelipper, and that crit does not matter there because of our loaded dice, making sure that we pick up the damage. And now we see Archaludon and Hydreigon come onto the field, and Staraptor also comes onto the field. We protect with Mamoswine this turn as we just Final Gambit their Hydreigon, since Hydreigons tend to be lower in health, and they go for the Electro Shot with Archaludon in their last turn of Rain here, but now we can bring Gallade onto the field, and Mamoswine just gets the full-on High Horsepower crit into Archaludon, which was absolutely not necessary there because Gallade could just Sacred Sword through the Archaludon's defense boost if it got to build any up. Here we have a Lilycold Trick Room team with a lot of Trick Room components. And for our team, it's especially bad if they get up Trick Room, since most of our mons are really, really speedy. We start with Gallade and Mamoswine here, as they lead Lilligant and Torkoal, which is pretty good for us. They decided to swap out Torkoal here into Gallade, and we Wide Guard with Gallade, but maybe the opponent reads that because they did not just decide to after you Eruption, and they instead decided to try and Sleep Powder into Gallade, but the Sleep Powder misses Gallade as we get the Icicle Spear into Lilligant here, taking Lilligant out of the game. But now with Gallade and Araquanid, we bring in Staraptor to try and get down and intimidate, but also because Gallade is theoretically asleep at this point, if Gallade had gotten the Sleep Powder landed on it, and I tried to take out the Trick Room user, but we only got 4 lands on our loaded dice, so unfortunately we were not able to take out Gallade on that turn. But we do get to take out Gallade on the next turn here by just clicking Ice Shard into it, and because they have their own Sun up, the Liquidation is not going to be able to KO Mammothswine, and we get to get Staraptor's Brave Bird into the Araquanid, and now it is just Torkoal left, and we protect Mammothswine to try and stall out their turns of Trick Room, as Staraptor is going to take the dive, and we bring Gallade back, and since Gallade is Focus Sash, we would have one kind of chance here in order to try and get Gallade to wake up with the Wide Guard, where if Gallade doesn't wake up here, it would go down to its Focus Sash, and Mammothswine would get knocked out, in which case I would go for Ice Shard into the Torkoal. But on this turn, they only have 1 turn of Trick Room left, and we would bring in Garchomp is the Pokemon that I had in the back here, and Garchomp would obviously resist the Eruption, or at least be able to protect out the Torkoal on this next turn of Trick Room, and then Garchomp would go for the Earthquake and win the game. So it didn't hugely benefit us that the Sleep Powder missed the Gallade, but it definitely did help wrap up the endgame a little bit there. And lastly, we have a Dondozo team where it also looks like they have a Annihilape, who's probably a Scarf Annihilape, and can afford to click Coaching into either Dondozo, Dragonite, or Kingambit in order to increase their damages. We have some pretty good components on this team for dealing with Dondozo, as we lead Garchomp and Pachirisu into Annihilape and Dragonite, so we don't get to see Dozo right away, as they just decide to use Coaching into Dragonite, and we protect Pachirisu so that we can Earthquake, and Earthquake does about half damage to Annihilape, and Pachirisu catches the Stomping Tantrum there, as they Coaching Dragonite again, and Pachirisu Terra Grasses. We get the Dragon Claw into Dragonite, and I kind of wish that I went for the Dragon Claw last turn, but we get another crit Nuzzle from Pachirisu, proving how strong Pachirisu is, as Pachirisu does not take very much damage from the Stomping Tantrum, and they try to Extreme Speed in order to take out Pachirisu here with their Coaching stacking, and the Dragon Claw unfortunately is not quite enough to take out Dragonite here, but now we swap in Miss Magius, and we catch the Extreme Speed on Miss Magius as another Coaching comes out, and we can afford to Earthquake the Annihilape, but Annihilape lives the attack too, which I was not planning. They Extreme Speed into Garchomp, but Garchomp takes out the Dragonite with Rough Skin, which doesn't matter because Miss Magius was faster than Dragonite and would always go for the Dazzling Gleam there. But now it is the Dondozo endgame with Tatsugiri, and we have Pachirisu, and we swap in Staraptor in order to get an Intimidate down into Dondozo as they order up into Staraptor, which gives them the attack boost back. We get the Nuzzle into Dondozo, which is what we really like because it means that the Dondozo is less likely to be able to not only move but also not to be able to protect. We get Super Fang into Dondozo, which does a bunch of damage into it as they order up into Pachirisu, and Pachirisu barely survives. They protect here to risk the leftovers at the cost of maybe getting a para, and they get their leftovers. We Hex the Dondozo, and the Hex is actually able to just flat out pick up KO, as I was looking to try and get this Super Fang off into Dondozo so that we could KO it with Hex on the next turn. But because Dondozo got knocked out by the Crix Hex, the Pachirisu is able to just Super Fang into Tatsugiri, and our Staraptor is Choice Scarf. Well, I don't believe that Tatsugiri was Choice Scarf, as we see it was slower. So it just clicks Muddy Water and Pachirisu dodges it, but the Brave Bird from Staraptor is able to wrap up the game there. But yeah, this was the Sinnoh team, and I think this team has a lot of components that are really good at carrying momentum, especially Pachirisu with like the Super Fang to make it so that you can easily pick up 2-hit KOs into Pokemon, and also the Nuzzle for your speed control. It's just that if this team doesn't get like its turn 1 right, it can go very, very wrong very, very quickly, so it can feel very difficult to build momentum in a lot of cases. You just have to know what your lines are really well in order to play this team well, I think. But that's going to be it for this video, so thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked it, maybe consider leaving a like on the video, and even consider subscribing, because both of those things would help me out an absolute ton, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you.